We just got the full context today. We live in a subunit of a larger house, and our landlord and a person live in the other units of the house, and we noticed that our landlord had brought a few different dates over to the house. We didn't mind, and we weren't surprised when a girl was walking around the property. Last month, we went to sleep at about midnight and woke up 30 minutes later to knocks at the door. I told my boyfriend not to open it, but he said it was the girl that we saw earlier. I still felt very uneasy about the situation, so I put my clothes on and grabbed my keys and picked up our dog in case I had to run out the back door. I then go stand in the hallway next to the front door so I can hear the conversation, but she can't see me. She sounds very drunk and she tells my boyfriend that she's my landlord's fiancée. I am somewhat confused by this because of our landlord's other dates. However, she starts talking about how we're good tenants and mentions personal details about us, so we assume that she actually is his fiancée. She asked my boyfriend for a lighter for a cigarette, and we expect this to be the end of the interaction, but she then tells my boyfriend that our landlord is at a hotel cheating on her right now. My boyfriend responds with, "Oh, wow." And then she started flirting with my boyfriend. She invited him to come swim in our landlord's pool with her, and he declined. Now I'm starting to get less scared and more annoyed with this chick. She's rambling about a bunch of different topics and basically holding my boyfriend hostage. And finally, she gets to our neighbors. She starts going on some racist rant about them, using slurs that I have literally never heard in real life because they're that bad. And at this point, I'm pretty sick of this woman, so I step into the door frame and tell her that we have to wake up early. She was clearly shocked by me showing up, and this is when her face changes. She glares at me, and suddenly we aren't good tenants anymore, and she calls us white trash for not taking our garbage bins out in time for trash day. She screams that she's going to get us evicted if we don't get on her good side, and at this point we just close the door in her face. We had a really long discussion about whether or not we should complain to our landlord about her, and we assumed that he actually was dating this girl and that she just happened to be crazy. She probably caught him cheating and was trying to sleep with my boyfriend for revenge or something, but realized that wasn't going to happen. Eventually, we decided to text him. He apologized for the situation but was very vague. He doesn't mention that she is not his fiancée and that he'll remove her, and we assume that this is the end of it. For the last month, she's been blasting music, banging on the walls, taking things out of the shed, and coming into our section of the backyard in the middle of the night. I was absolutely terrified the first week and couldn't sleep at all. I would stay up all night listening to sounds and staring at our back window to see if she was in our yard, and eventually I just kind of got used to it. Our landlord had basically vanished. We hadn't seen him for the entire month until today. And today my boyfriend is walking our dog when he sees our landlord back on his porch, and our landlord finally tells us the full story. He went on a few dates with this woman and she seemed totally normal. Eventually, they go back to his section of the house, and when he wakes up, she's behaving much differently. He asks her to head out while he's at work, and he comes back and she's still there. And it turns out that this is what she does. She goes home with men and invades their home until they get her lawfully evicted. My landlord went to a different property for a month while he worked on a case to get her evicted. And we found out that she got served an eviction warning the same day that she came to our house, and that's why she was flirting with my boyfriend in an attempt to squat in our home. And that's why she was so angry when she found out that I lived there too. My landlord actually negotiated a way to get her out of the house a few days early. He bought her a one-way flight to another state, so if you live in the Midwest, watch out. She's coming north, and I'm very thankful that it's over here. Surprisingly, this is one of those stories I forgot about until a few days ago when I was talking to a school friend on call and I got reminded of this. She was pretty freaked when I told her. You see, this happened when I was roughly maybe 7 or 8, so some of the details are a bit fuzzy, but I remember it pretty vividly. This may seem like unimportant context, but my family had just moved to America and were renting the top portion of your regular suburban house in a pretty safe cul-de-sac. I had friends, they were triplets, about 3 or 4 houses down. Not far at all, and every day I'd go hang out with them. And around 9 or 10 in the night, my older brother, around 11 or 12 I'd say, would make the 2-minute walk and come and get me and walk me home since I was pretty young. One night he came to get me as usual. The sun wasn't fully down, but it was getting pretty dark. We started down the walk as normal when he started casting glances over his shoulder. I didn't really notice until he shoved me hard away from the sidewalk and between 2 houses. Each house had a huge fence that separated their backyard, not ours though, and he'd made me crouch behind the fence. I remember being really scared, but more confused since I had no damn idea what the hell was going on. More specifically, he was a pretty big prankster. Once he convinced me my older sister crashed her car into the ocean, so I didn't really believe him when he turned and said, "Walk behind the houses. I think someone's following us." Now looking back now, he was probably trying to keep me calm. However, whatever calm was left in my tiny 8-year-old body was gone the moment that I turned around and looked. The man had followed us behind the houses, and he was just by the edge of a few houses down near a different fence line. He had a black hoodie on, with the hood up, black sweatpants, and white sneakers. I had pretty bad eyesight due to some health problems, but back then it was crystal clear, and I could see with horrifying clarity that his jaw was just hanging open, like he was just standing there with his jaw hung open. It was horrifying. I think now that I'm older, maybe he had some kind of medical condition that affected his jaw, or maybe he did crack, I don't know. But back then, I could have sworn on God that I was seeing some kind of demon. Now anyway, my brother, when he saw that I was looking and getting ready to freak out, he told me, "Just run, as fast as I can to our house." And we booked it. Neither of us looked back, but we were so scared out of our minds. And like I said, we only rented the top portion of the house, so the bottom, with a sliding door in the backyard, belonged to some other tenant. I don't remember if she was home or not, but I remember tugging that thing open and locking it as fast as I can, and when I looked up, he was there in the yard, a little away from the door, just staring at us, with that jaw. Me and my brother told my sister and my mother immediately. My father was away for a work trip at the time, but nothing came of it. Not until the day after. We went to meet my dad at his warehouse, which had a small live-in portion above it where we lazed around until he was ready to head home with us. Around dusk, he came up and told us that we might have to wait since the police were there. He walked us around to the back window of the small area to show us police officers all around the backyard area of the warehouses. There were a few in line and a white van parked on the grass by the edge of the woods. Like I said, I was pretty young, so I don't remember many details of what actually happened, but I do remember my dad, who hadn't been told about the day prior, telling us that they found a man and a woman in the van. The man, he said, had his mouth hanging wide open. He seemed really disturbed while telling me about the whole thing and wouldn't answer any more questions about the woman. Maybe she was dead, I have zero idea. I do know that they were arrested on trespassing charges. I don't know anything else, and I haven't asked about it. I doubt that he'd remember. It's been over a decade, and he's pushing 70, but it freaks me out to this day. I still can't believe it happened, and I don't have any answers for it. I talked to my brother briefly about it in hopes that he remembered more than I do, but all I got was a long tirade about whatever medical condition the guy probably had for his mouth to be like that. He's an annoying medical student now, and sometimes I think maybe the guy didn't mean any harm and was just drugged out of his mind, but this was in the world's safest neighborhood and doesn't explain why or how he showed up at my dad's workplace. This all happened to my dad way back when I was a kid, so I have no memory of it whatsoever, and all I have to go on is what he's told me. But here goes. When I was younger, my mom and dad were in a kind of precarious financial situation, so we rented out the second floor of what was quite a large house to this older lady named June. Well, one day, She starts getting behind on her rent, and my parents understanding at first, but after a while, she started acting more and more squirrely, as they put it, and the relationship between her and my parents got worse and worse. At first, it was just excuses as to why she didn't have the rent. After that, she got more and more aggressive every time my dad brought the subject up. In the end, she owed 4 months' worth of rent when my parents finally decided that they couldn't have June living there anymore. It wasn't an easy decision either. They'd started off really liking each other, but the situation had just soured over time. So then, one day, Dad goes to confront her and tells her that they want her to move out. Dad says he was expecting quite a confrontation, but to his surprise, June said she had the cash for 2 months of back rent and promised to get him the rest by the end of the following month. My dad said that this was obviously a welcome turn of events, and he accepted June's invitation to come up to her half of the house so she could give him the cash. She asked him to wait on the landing, which was decorated as a kind of sitting area with a coffee table and a few chairs. Then she went off to get the money. Dad said that he waited for a little while. Then as time started to drag on, he got more and more impatient. He went off looking for June, but he found that she'd locked herself in her bedroom. Dad asked what's going on, but June says everything's fine, and she's just looking for the cash. Dad asks why she'd locked the door, but she repeats that she's looking for the cash and that everything is fine. Dad then waits some more, growing more and more frustrated, but the next time he calls June's name, she won't reply. Dad then puts his ear to the door because he can hear whispering, and he's almost certain that he hears her saying, "Help me, please. I'm trapped in here." It takes Dad a second or two to figure out what's going on, and he said at first he started asking her, "Are you okay in there? What's going on?" But again, she doesn't answer him. Dad said he was thinking, who the hell is she talking to? But then a minute later, it dawned on him. She's talking on the phone, and by the sounds of it, there's a good chance the person she's talking to is a 911 operator. Dad's suspicions were confirmed a few minutes later when he heard sirens in the street outside, and he went out to meet the cops to explain how it was all just some kind of false alarm. The cops said that June said that she had been violently assaulted by the homeowner, i.e. my dad. But since that wasn't remotely true, he was only too happy to allow them entry into our home. Dad showed them up onto the landing, how there were no signs of any struggle or anything, and then directed them to the room where June was held up. Once she heard the cops were there, June opened the door, but only allowed them entry into the room and not my dad. Minutes later, the cops came out again, saying to Dad, "You're not under arrest right now, but she needs more medical attention," referring to June. My dad panics and once again explains to the cops that he didn't hit her, and that he's genuinely stunned at how she'd gotten hurt when just moments before she'd been fine. But then the cops are all chill with him and explain they know that he hadn't hit her because they can clearly see where this lady had been bashing her head with something blunt in the same place over and over again. The lady said Dad punched her, and there was no way those wounds came from punches unless my dad was wearing a brass knuckle or something. And after talking to my mom, who had been sitting downstairs the whole time and had heard nothing, they let the EMTs take the lady to the hospital, then waited a few days before telling her that there was no case against my dad. They didn't charge her with a false report, which made my mom really angry, but it did give my dad enough leverage to get her gone once and for all. He said if she hadn't moved out by the end of the month, he was going to sue her for filing a false police report against him. Dad said that he wasn't even sure how that'd work, but he sure as hell scared that lady enough that she packed up and found somewhere else to live. I have a vague memory of this woman, but no memory of all the drama that unfolded. But my mom and dad say it was a particularly stressful time in their early parenting days. After all, they were sleeping in the same house as some obviously crazy woman with her kid who was still only like 3 or 4 years old at the time. And it kind of creeps me out to think about sometimes too, because if she'd do that kind of thing to herself, who knows what she would have done to us if the urge had suddenly taken her. Way back in May of 1995, a 29-year-old truck driver named Devin Eugene Williams was living in Americus, Kansas with his wife and 3 young children. Having just moved into a brand new family home, Devin's wife would later say it was the happiest point in their marriage. But beneath the surface, something terrible festered and unfurled. Devin was described by friends as a patient and good-natured young man, but just weeks after beginning an exciting new chapter in his life, he disappeared without a trace. On Sunday, May 28th of 1995, a 48-foot, 10-ton, 18-wheeler semi-truck hurtled through Arizona's Tonto National Forest. The roar of its engine was so loud that 2 campers, named Lynn and Jack Yarrington, temporarily halted their hike to see what all the commotion was. They approached the nearest highway, then seconds later, spotted a speeding 18-wheeler recklessly careening back and forth along a stretch of road it was most certainly not suited for, and all at breakneck speed so fast it sent a shiver down the Yarrington spines. Another group of hikers, this one traveling by car, suffered a hair-raisingly close call when the same 18-wheeler drove head-on at them, following a chance encounter on the highway. The hikers were able to swerve out of the truck's path, and each avoided sudden and violent deaths, but later stated that the truck's mustachioed driver had remained disturbingly expressionless despite narrowly avoiding his own complete annihilation. Later on that day, a group on their way to a picnic spotted the stationary truck, which by that point had swerved off the road and become stuck in a field. After stopping their vehicle, one of the picnic group climbed out of their car and asked the truck driver if he needed any help. The driver's reply was as chilling as it was confusing. "They made me do it," he said, as if answering a question that hadn't been asked. The Good Samaritan, a man named Charles Hall, reportedly asked the truck driver, "Who made you do what?" To which the driver replied in a panicked voice, "No, you can't help. No one can. I'll never get it out of there. I'm going to jail." When Charles heard the word jail being thrown around, he realized that he might have stumbled across something deeply sinister. He agreed to leave the truck driver alone, but later contacted the local sheriff's department, speaking to a Deputy Wells regarding the man's suspicious demeanor. Much like the campers, the deputy was confused as to why such a large vehicle would drive along unsuitable forest roads and went to investigate. Upon his arrival, he discovered the semi stuck in deep mud within a meadow not far from Forest Service Road 137 in the Buck Springs area. Once Deputy Wells looked inside the truck, he discovered the cargo within undisturbed and intact, 1,200 boxes of lettuce and strawberries with the refrigeration still running. The vehicle appeared completely abandoned and the cab had been firmly locked. Deputy Wells checked his national crime computer and learned that there were no reports submitted for either a missing truck or a missing driver. He also later stated, upon peering through the window of the truck's cab, he noted the interior was well kept and there was no indication that any foul play had taken place. Later that day, Lynn and Jack Yarrington were driving along Forest Service Road 321 when they came upon a man standing among some trees at the roadside. According to the Yarringtons, they stopped their car, only to see that the man was kneeling on the ground, staring at a tree, and appeared to be mumbling to himself. The couple said it was impossible to make out exactly what he was saying, and after Jack asked if the man needed any assistance, he replied simply, "I've got to light the grill." Moments later, Jack watched as the stranger produced a $20 bill from his shirt pocket. The stranger then picked up a rock, held the bill to the ground, and began striking it with a stone, as if attempting to spark a flame. Deeply alarmed by what they were seeing, the Harringtons returned to their car, only to have the stranger scream unintelligibly before he hurled the rock in their direction. He then appeared to stumble into the Arringtons' direction, prompting them to immediately flee the scene. Only later was the strange man confirmed to have been the truck driver, Devin Williams, and sadly, it marked the last time he was ever seen alive. When he failed to stick to his delivery schedule and confident in the belief that he'd never willingly abandon a shipment, Devin's coworkers reported him missing. Investigators began to track Devin's movements leading up to his disappearance and learned he'd left his home on May 23rd, heading west on a route that he'd taken many times before. He successfully delivered his haul to California, reloaded his truck for his trip back to the Midwest, and then had a brief conversation with his boss, Tom Wilson. Wilson later stated that everything seemed fine and that Devin wasn't acting out of the ordinary. He was punctual, seemed lucid, and gave no indications that anything was wrong. A few nights later, on the evening of Saturday, May 27th, Devin arrived in Kingman, Arizona. He would call his boss for the second and final time, ensuring him that he'd make it to Kansas City on schedule, but added an eerie addendum when he complained of insomnia. His boss reportedly asked if he'd be able to complete his journey, but Devin once again assured him that he'd be fine. Yet according to police reports, Devin never even made it out of Arizona. Arizona missing persons detective Bruce Cornish would later state that he and his team were completely flummoxed when it came to Devin's potential fate. He was neither a criminal nor a drug user and had no history of mental health problems prior to his disappearance, meaning easy explanations were hard to come by. This led many to theorize that Devin's disappearance was entirely voluntary, with some pointing to the fact that certain personal items had been removed from the truck. Nevertheless, authorities mounted a large-scale search for the missing trucker, utilizing foot patrols, search dogs, off-road vehicles, and dozens of civilian volunteers. Search teams were told to look for scraps of clothing and even bone fragments, but despite days of searching, not a single trace of Devin Williams was ever found. This also made for a chilling anomaly, as up until that point, the Scottsdale-based search and rescue team charged with recovering his remains had yet to come up short in the course of a long-term search. Devin's disappearance marked the first time that they'd failed to bring home a missing person, either dead or alive, which, to many, was as eerie as it was perplexing. 2 years later, on May 2nd of 1997, two hikers were tracing the bottom of Gila County's Mogollon Rim when they stumbled upon the remains of a human skull. Dental records would later confirm what many had first feared. The skull belonged to the missing trucker, Devin Williams. Although the skull had been damaged, a coroner determined that it was impossible to conclude if this was the result of a deliberate, violent act or the result of scavengers consuming a corpse following an otherwise accidental death. Some suggested the erratic behavior Devin displayed was the result of a diabetic episode. Others argue sleep deprivation or mental illness were to blame. Some even purport that Devin was the victim of a slow form of carbon monoxide poisoning following a leak in his truck's cabin, but to date, no such theory has been irrefutably confirmed. Devin's wife, Mary Lou Williams, still longs for a day when explanations of her husband's fate will be beyond dispute, but she also stated that with each passing year, the hope of seeing such a day slowly and painfully decreases. Mary Lou has said that back when her husband was listed as a missing person, the lack of conclusive answers caused her children terrible suffering. Yet the discovery of Devin's skull brought only a sliver of morbid closure to the family, as many questions still remained. For example, what caused Devin to stray so far from his intended route? And if his state of mind was affected, what exactly caused such a catastrophic mental break? However, some suggest that Devin was well within his right mind when he swerved his truck off the road, as prior to his abandonment, he ensured the cab was locked. Unless Devin suffered some kind of rapid mental breakdown in the space of just 2 to 3 hours, then something frightened him so badly that he did things that most would consider to be highly and unhealthily irrational. Some say fear can drive a man to madness, in which case, what was Devin Williams so deathly afraid of? And could it possibly explain why his broken skull was found just a few years later, less than a mile away from the spot where he disappeared? I used to do a lot of wilderness hiking in real remote, inaccessible locations, and this is the story of the weirdest, most unsettling thing I'd ever come across. The woods have been quiet that day. I'd been hiking alone for 3 days, and the sense of isolation was starting to feel heavy. The trail was overgrown with trees pressing in close, and the further I went, the less it felt like a trail at all. I liked the feeling, though. It was the reason I visited places like that in the first place, to feel like I was stepping into a world untouched by anyone else. Around mid-afternoon, I came across what looked like a clearing, and then as the trees started to thin out, I saw it. It stood in a small clearing, perfectly centered as if someone had placed it there with care, maybe 8 feet tall and made of dark, weathered wood. It wasn't just a piece of wood, though. It was carved, roughly but with purpose. Faces were etched into its surface, crude and uneven, some long and narrow and others wide and round. They stacked on top of one another, staring out into all directions, and as I stared at them, I figured out what it was. It was a totem pole. But what caught my attention most were the teeth. The totem was covered in them, jammed into the wood like little pieces of decoration. At first, I thought that they were all animal teeth. There were long, curved ones like from a deer, and sharp ones that might have been from a dog or a wolf. But then I saw others, smaller and straighter, ones that looked almost human. They were yellowed and cracked, and some still rooted in fragments of jawbone, and my stomach turned and I stepped back on instinct. I didn't stay long. The thing felt wrong, like all those carved eyes were watching me, and I wanted to forget what I'd seen, but it stayed in my mind with me as I walked. The forest didn't seem the same after that, though. The air was heavier, the shadows felt longer and darker, and I decided to cut the day short and set up camp further from the clearing, maybe a mile away. But even then, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every sound made me sit up, and as much as I told myself it was just animals moving through the underbrush or the wind stirring the trees, I couldn't help feeling like something was out there, watching me. I didn't light a fire. It felt safer to stay in the dark, even though I was freezing, and I thought that I might not sleep a wink that night, but eventually, exhaustion took over and I drifted off. And I dreamed about teeth. And in the morning, I packed up and left as quickly as I could. I didn't go near the clearing again, and I didn't even look back. I've done a lot of solo hikes, but that was the first time that I felt like I wasn't alone, and I didn't like it. And a year later, curiosity got the better of me. The memory of that totem had stuck with me, but I started feeling like maybe I'd been overthinking the whole thing, and started to wonder if I'd imagined parts of it or blown them out of proportion. And so I went back. That time, I brought a disposable camera with me, one of those cheap ones that you wind up by hand, and I wasn't expecting to find the totem again, but I figured if I did, I'd want proof to send to you. And the forest felt different on the second trip. The overgrowth wasn't as dense as I remembered, and the trail was easier to follow, less wild, and I reached the clearing by late afternoon, but the totem wasn't there. The spot was empty, just a patch of dirt and grass where it should have been, and I walked in circles around the area looking for signs that it had been moved, but there was nothing. No drag marks, no holes where it might have been anchored, and it was as if it had never been there at all. But I know what I saw. The teeth, the carvings, the faces. It wasn't something you'd forget, but there was no trace of it. I took pictures of the clearing anyway, just to prove myself that I'd gone back. And when I got the photos developed, they showed really nothing but trees and grass. No shadows or odd shapes in the background, just an ordinary patch of forest. And I stopped telling people about it after that, and the few times I tried, I could see it in their faces. The disbelief, the very polite nods, the way their eyes shifted as they looked for a way to change the subject. And I get it. If someone told me a crazy story like that, I'd probably think that they were making it up too. But I know what I saw. I know how it felt to stand in front of that thing and how the air seemed to just sort of hum with something I couldn't explain. And I know the fear that kept me awake that night, the sense that something was out there in the dark. And even now, I can't think about it for too long without feeling a chill run down my spine. I haven't been back to that part of the forest since then. I still hike, but I stick to trails that I know, places where other people go, and I don't like to be too far from civilization anymore. It's not the wilderness that scares me. It's the things that you can't explain, the things that shouldn't be there, but are. This account pertains to my current upstairs neighbor. He disappears for weeks at a time, and then will suddenly hear what sounds like a slaughterhouse happening at 11 p.m. on a weeknight, announcing that he's now home. There's been a lot of things that have happened, but the top two that pretty much sum up everything you need to know about just how creepy this guy is this. One day I was bringing up groceries and he offered to help. I told him thank you and assumed that he would just take the bags to the second floor landing, place them outside the door, and then continue up to his apartment, like our other neighbor who has done this exact thing before. He follows me back out to my car and then stands about 4 inches behind me as I lean into the trunk of my car to get the last 2 bags. He takes all of the bags and then walks upstairs. As I finish saying the, "Oh, thank you, you really didn't have to do that," lines and unlock my door, he goes, "Oh, it's no problem. I know your old man leaves for work early and you're home alone." I barely open the door enough to walk into my apartment before I can turn around, and he's walked in. He opened up my fridge and puts the milk in, and he starts looking around our apartment and into our bedroom. And now, just for context of why I didn't flip out and start screaming, it was 8 in the morning and the 2 other people who live in our building were gone, so literally no one would have heard me. He's probably 6'2" and I'm 5'5" if I have on some thick shoes, and I say, "Okay, thanks for the help, I'll see you around." And he continues to dig through the fridge and looking towards my bed. Then he turns and starts stepping towards me, and then he realizes that I have a very large butcher knife 4 inches away from my hand, and then he chooses to leave. I call my husband, who's at work an hour away, crying, and tell him what just happened. That night he goes to confront the guy, and he won't answer the door. And so my husband goes up the next day, and the guy breaks down crying and tells my husband he doesn't remember anything and he's so sorry and he was just trying to be very neighborly. And my husband just tells him, "My wife's a tough girl, and she can carry the groceries up herself." Sometime later we woke up one night hearing someone yelling and screaming outside. When we look out our living room window, we see the upstairs creeper with blood streaming down his face. He could barely stand, screaming at the police, "I'm not going to the damn hospital." Apparently, he had gotten into a fight at the pool hall down the street with 4 or 5 other guys and gotten his ass kicked. Eventually, the cops got a hold of him and took him to the hospital in cuffs. And the next morning, I went to go get groceries alone, and my husband didn't have to work that day. When I came home, he was standing outside smoking a cigarette, and you could tell that he was still messed up from whatever he was on the night before. This time, he walked straight up to the car and acted like he was waiting for me to get out, but he stood by the trunk. This was also the first time that I had seen him since the initial incident that he could have thought my husband wasn't home. I called my husband, and when he saw that I was on the phone and heard my husband coming down the stairs of the building, he took off running around the corner. My husband took me to the store that day and got me a gun. And now anytime he sees me alone, he just stares, but if my husband is around, he acts like he doesn't even see us. And now I know this might come across as a sort of dumb idiot just whining about her antisocial neighbors, but sometimes I get really scared being here whenever my husband isn't around, and since writing all of this down has made me feel just a little bit less alone, I guess it was worth it. My name is Nina, and I've officially decided to sit down and write up the story of something I witnessed way back during my first ever office job. When I first started, I was getting to know all of my coworkers. A guy named Peter stood out right away. Everyone was super nice to me, but Peter just ignored me, and then was kind of cold and rude when I went over to introduce myself. People said he was like that with everyone and not to let it bother me. He showed up to work, did his job, and then drove home again, all without sharing so much as a good morning with the rest of us. I guess that was just his way. I mean, I still thought that he was a jerk, but he was good at his job, and these days I'd rather work with a competent asshole than an incompetent friend. But then came the day when Peter started not being so good at his job. He started showing up late, looking like he hadn't slept, and when he started overrunning deadlines on a regular basis, management asked him if he wanted to take some vacation time to get himself together. We never found out what was going on with him, whether it was a medical thing or something going on at home, but Peter refused the time off and continued with his poor work performance. I've heard rumors that something was going to happen with him, whether it be a meeting with the bosses, suspension, or getting altogether fired. But it all came to a head one morning. Peter staggered into work smelling like a distillery. Word that Peter was drunk spread around the office like wildfire, and we were just waiting for something to happen when, finally, one of our bosses came out to talk to him. I don't know what she said to him exactly, but Peter responded by yelling out, "Just let me do my effing job." And then, without a word, she turned around, walked back into her office, and closed the door. A minute later, the big boss, a burly guy in his 50s, goes out and gives Peter a piece of his mind, telling him if he doesn't take a cab home immediately, emphasis on the cab part, then he was going to be fired on the spot. Peter started cursing out the boss, calling him all kinds of things I'd rather not repeat. Then our boss goes back to his office after announcing that he's going to call the cops. I hate to say it, it makes us sound kind of terrible in a way, but everyone in the office was just completely gripped. Someone was having a complete meltdown right there in front of us, and as sad and upsetting as it was,
Nintendo Switch 2. Joy-Con 2 controllers that attach in a snap.
completely engrossed. And I kind of feel bad for Peter too. I don't think anyone in the office was enjoying what was going on, but Peter was drunk, and he sounded mad as hell too, so with the chances of things breaking out into violence being so high, I guess that's what had us all watching out of the corners of our eyes. Anyway, our big boss only came out of his office one more time to warn Peter that the cops are on their way, but Peter just tells him to go to hell. Then maybe 20 or 30 minutes later, the cops show up and ask Peter to leave. We were all watching by then. All the higher-ups had come out of their offices, everyone was standing up over their cubicles or had wheeled their chairs around the side, all to watch poor old Peter get thrown out or potentially arrested. Someone, I didn't see who, said, "Just go, buddy, get some help." Not even in an insulting way either. They were being genuine, I think. And Peter responded by screaming something back at them. And that's when the cops decided that he was going to jail. One of them started barking, "Stand up and put your hands behind your back," while the other reached for his cuffs and got them ready to put on Peter's wrists. But he still refused to budge and kept telling them to go F themselves. And that's when the struggle really started. One of the cops started trying to grab Pete's arms, and he started pulling them away and generally resisting. The other cop then got involved, and they both were trying to restrain Pete when suddenly he kind of twists and turns, and all you heard was one of the cops scream out, "He's got a gun! He's got a gun!" Someone, I don't know who, but it was one of my coworkers, shouted out, "Everybody down!" and that's what we did, almost instinctually. Everyone laying on the floor as fast as we could, and I remember praying that I wouldn't hear a gunshot, right up until I heard 3 loud bangs. This might sound odd to some American and non-American folks alike, but I never actually heard a gunshot until that day, and let me tell you, it's something I never want to be that close to ever again. I think maybe it was the enclosed space of the office, not that enclosed, but you get what I mean, combined with how terrified I was, that made the blast seem so loud, but it was easily the second most horrifying thing I'd ever witnessed. But then, the first most horrifying thing was what I saw when I finally stood up. I guess one of the cops had panicked, and instead of helping wrestle Peter's hand off the other cop's gun, he just pulled his own and shot him 3 times. I didn't see it at first. I just heard screaming and one lady yelling out, "Oh my God, oh my God," before she burst into tears and had to be taken away. I stayed down at first, thinking it was Pete that might have done the shooting, but then when I heard what sounded like the 2 cops talking to each other, I finally stood up and made the mistake of looking over in their direction. And there was a lot of blood. I didn't think a person could bleed that much and still be alive, but he was. Peter had somehow survived being shot 3 times up close, and seeing him move and try to breathe gave some people hope. The cop who shot him ended up walking out of the office sounding like he was about to cry, saying, "He had your gun, I swear to God, he almost had your gun." Sometime after that, after they were able to stabilize him and the EMT showed up pretty quick, they put Peter on a stretcher and wheeled him out to the waiting ambulance outside. The rest of the day's work was canceled, and we found out that night that Peter had actually died on his way to the hospital. It was devastating. I didn't even know Peter all that well. I didn't even really like him, but finding out that he died was just so incredibly upsetting to me and everyone who'd worked with him. The office was closed for the rest of the week, but even when my coworkers started to head back over the month or so that followed, some took more time than others, I couldn't bring myself to go back to somewhere where someone had been killed. I think the thing that really gets me about it is that some people are shot by the cops after committing a crime or doing something that endangers people in some way, and others are shot for next to no reason at all from what I hear, but Pete was killed because he was just having a bad day. I know he went for the cop's gun, I guess, and some of my coworkers actually saw his hand reaching for it. I'm just saying that he didn't have to die like that. I don't know what I have done in that situation, or rather I do, but just hitting him might have resulted in Pete getting the cop's gun, and then who the hell knows what would have happened. Some of us might have even been killed if the gunfight broke out, and I just wish that things didn't have to be that way. And I know that probably sounds incredibly naive of me, but I really do wonder sometimes if I'd have given Pete a big old hug that morning, if things would have gone a little different. I was a university lecturer for the better part of 20 years, and in that time, I've met some great students and some not so great students. One lad, an international student from a country that'll remain unnamed, was probably the most difficult student I'd ever come across, and his country of origin shall remain unnamed because, frankly, he was the only problematic student from that nation that I'd ever had the displeasure of dealing with. Every other international student from this particular country was respectful, considerate, and exceptionally hardworking, but this one was not. The first thing he told me after realizing that my first initial stood for Maria and not something like Matthew was that no one in his country would take a female professor seriously. I simply replied if he wanted a passing grade, he could take the attitude of when in Rome. He seemed to find that amusing, and while he claimed that he'd show me all the respect I deserved, he did so with a deeply patronizing tone that suggested that he would never have done the same if we were in his nation of birth. And when it dawned on him that he'd actually have to work to get a passing grade, the student in question became incredibly ill-tempered and his performance dropped off completely. He became more and more problematic as the weeks went by until one day he simply stopped attending lectures. Initially, I had absolutely no issue with this whatsoever because it had gotten to the point where he could be rather disruptive from time to time. But after a while, I started to wonder what was happening with him. I ended up asking a colleague if she'd heard anything about him, and I'll never forget the look on her face as she asked me, "You haven't heard?" As it turns out, the surly student that I'd had problems with had been arrested by the Cambridgeshire police on charges of kidnap, false imprisonment, and grievous bodily harm. It took a while for the whole story to come out because, at first, no one knew anything other than the crimes he'd been charged with. But it didn't take long for people to piece things together and link it to another worrying on-campus incident. About a week before the problematic student stopped attending lectures, someone had filed a missing persons report with the police. This person claimed a friend or housemate of theirs, a female Taiwanese student, had gone out for a drinks date with a fellow student and then failed to return home.
가벼워, 신축성, 자유로워.
Students staying over at each other's flats or dorms is a very common occurrence, so for the first 24 hours or so, no one batted an eyelid. But then after another 24 hours without any communication from her, the girl's friends became concerned. They contacted the police and gave them the name of their friend's date, and officers were dispatched to the date's home. And the date turned out to be the same student I'd had problems with, but he claimed to have no idea where she was. The police then tracked the girl's mobile phone and discovered it was within just 50 meters of the guy's flat. So back they went to ask him a second round of questions, but not before acquiring a search and seizure order from a local judge. This allowed them into the student's flat, where upon entry, they found their missing Taiwanese girl. After accompanying the male student for drinks, the student had followed the male back to his flat. He'd been perfectly nice and charming through the course of their evening, but upon arriving back at his flat, his demeanor must have changed completely. When she expressed a desire to leave, the student became violent, and when things became physical, he restrained her, tied her wrists and ankles, and then proceeded to beat and torture her with a cigarette lighter. The victim was told that it was her education on why she shouldn't leave him, and the sooner she accepted that she was his property, the sooner her ordeal would end. From what I understand, the whole thing caused something of an international incident at the university, and the girl's family wanted to see their daughter's abuser prosecuted to the full extent of the law, and he was. It's just the punishment wasn't anywhere near in line with the crime. Instead of being sent to prison, the student agreed to pay the victim a hefty sum in compensation before being deported from the UK and given a lifetime ban from returning. I know that's at least something, but hearing that he'd basically gotten away with it was just as shocking as hearing about what he'd done in the first place. There must have been an awful lot of diplomatic wrangling going on behind the scenes, and although I've only a cursory knowledge of it, I know the word of international relations can be a murky one indeed. It just makes me sick to think of that poor girl, of everything she went through, and know that the person who did it was simply able to buy their way out of a prison sentence. Because for men like that, prison is the only place for them. Back in junior high, I remember we had a Gulf War vet for a science teacher, who for the sake of anonymity I'll just call Mr. Marine. Mr. Marine was the kind of dude who obviously had his crap together in times of panic. In the 3 years we were there, I almost never saw him do more than crack a calm smile. Then, in 9th grade, junior high was 7th, 8th, and 9th where I went, this girl, Chloe, who showed up late to our first period class every day and was kinda quiet, she failed to show up at all. For some reason, instead of marking her absent, he called the office and had a very quiet conversation. He looked visibly disturbed and shaken. The next day, the girl showed up to class just a bit late, but with a broken nose, a black eye, and her jaw wired shut. Even though this was 25 or so years ago, I can still see the look on Mr. Marine's face when he saw her. It was pure, murderous fury, and even more terrifying, he pulled her into his office, had a calm conversation with her, and sent her to the nurse. He then told the rest of us that nobody was to say anything to her about it as she'd had an accident and was embarrassed, and most people didn't even really care. Quickly the rumors spread, though. Did you see Chloe? Jesus, somebody kicked the hell out of her. I happened to be passing the office on my way home that night, and I saw the principal and 2 police officers, Mr. Marine and Chloe, in there with the door shut, and she was crying. One of the police officers noticed me looking and pulled the blinds. I normally walked home, so I waited. I think school got out at around 2:30 or so, and I usually hung around with some friends to listen to music or play basketball for 30 minutes or whatever before I started walking. I waited outside the front of the school until almost 4 p.m. Finally, a car pulled up and this dude gets out, looking just angry. He's swearing to himself, and as I'm the only one out there, he says, "You, where's the office?" And I just pointed, but he didn't make it to the door. The 2 cops came out quick, one in front and one behind, and the one who approached the guy started telling him to calm down. This angry dude just loses his mind, screaming, "My daughter should have been home an hour ago and I had to leave work. I'm going to sue." The cops are trying to calm him down. Then out of nowhere, Mr. Marine comes out the side door of the office, his face lit like the fires of hell, and he just straight up goes full horizontal, 4 feet in the air, and just body tackles this guy. In seconds, he's on top of him, and he's probably hit the guy 10 times, closed fists and all. And worse yet, he's not saying a single thing. He's not making any noise, just deep rhythmic breathing like you do when weightlifting. Short breath in, long breath out, smack, smack, smack.
The end of the decade 2010-2019 has been marked by numerous demonstrations, protests, and social movements around the world. Whether it is the protest in Barcelona for the independence of Catalonia, the Yellow Vest movement in France, or the protest in Hong Kong against the amendment of the extradition law, people all over the world want their voices to be heard, and they wish to express their opinions in a loud, clear, and ongoing manner. The costs associated with the security logistics due to the riots and the violence generated by such events are enormous. In December 2019, Bloomberg reported that since the beginning of the demonstration in June, the cost of the Hong Kong police force amounted to $120 million in overtime alone. According to the website hongkongf.com, about 10.5 million Hong Kong dollars had to be spent on property maintenance costs, and over $200 million were needed to repair the damage caused in the subway. Furthermore, there is also a human cost associated with the Hong Kong protests. As of December 2019, 2 people have died since the beginning of the events, while more than 2,600 casualties have been recorded. But it would seem that the social unrest has most notably had repercussions on citizens' mental health. According to a study published in the British magazine The Lancet, post-traumatic stress disorder and depressions have risen sharply amongst Hong Kongers since the start of the pro-democracy demonstrations. This study was conducted among 18,000 people aged 15 and over between 2009 and 2019. It reveals that 37.4% of Hong Kong's adult population have shown depressive symptoms since the start of the demonstration in June 2019. 11% of the population reported probable depression or suspected PTSD since the beginning of the crisis, which is 6 times higher than in 2014 before the Umbrella movement. This increase is comparable to those experiencing large-scale disasters, armed conflicts, or terrorist attacks. Suicidal thoughts were also reported in the study. Michael Nee of the University of Hong Kong, co-director of the study, states that social unrest as an emerging socio-political determinant of the population mental health remains largely unassessed. According to the same study, The conclusion is simple. Hong Kong is under-resourced to deal with this excess mental health burden. If you want to overcome depressions or anxiety, we encourage you to read our article, Overcoming Your Anxieties. You will find some vital keys that will bring you the peace of mind that you seek and that will literally change the course of your life.
If you liked this video, please like, comment, and subscribe. And for more content like this, please visit our website at tomorrowsworldviewpoint.org.
The cops actually kind of take their time getting him off the guy. One casually handcuffs the guy, and the other handcuffs Mr. Marine, who is standing untouched except for some bloody knuckles and breathing steadily. Face red from exertion, eyes wide in anger and satisfaction, he's just not saying a word. I decide to walk home at that point. And as I'm heading up the road, an ambulance, sirens and all, flies past me towards the school. And the next day, Mr. Marine wasn't in school, and we had a substitute instead. By the end of the day, people were telling me the story, and it was completely wrong, of course. I heard things like, Mr. Marine pulled out a gun and shot him in the gut, or Mr. Marine stabbed him with that flip knife he has, or even Mr. Marine choked him out and almost killed him and now he's in prison. None of those were true, obviously. And then the next week, without any explanation at all, Mr. Marine was back. First thing I noticed was written on the chalkboard, "If you ask, you go to detention." His face made it clear that he wasn't to be tested and did not have any sense of humor about it. Nobody saw Chloe again after that. I don't know what happened. And about 5 or 6 years ago, I was telling this story to a friend, and he said, "Well, why don't you just look her up on Facebook?" I felt stupid that I hadn't even thought of that. I went to my mom's, broke out my junior high yearbook, and found her last name that I'd completely forgotten, and I typed it into Facebook, and I found a couple dozen options, and her name is pretty common, and eventually I found her on LinkedIn, of all places. She ended up going to the University of Colorado, a master's program, and now works in finance or something. Her photo looked happy, which made me happy too. I Googled her a bit out of curiosity and found some articles that she'd written for various anti-bullying and abuse awareness and management things. One of them was told like a fictional story almost. A girl came to school late every day, lacking in energy, and she had no personality of note, and was quiet and meek. She wore loose-fitting clothing, and she had a few friends. It was evident to me pretty quickly what she was talking about, which was herself. And in the story she writes, the girl had been physically abused for years by her stepdad, an abusive alcoholic, and it took a teacher with no training at all to determine what had happened and start the chain of events that ended the abuse. The point of the story was to teach other teachers what signs to watch out for, what personality traits to look for. And after that, I looked up Mr. Marine as well to see how he was doing. I was worried he was dead. After all, he was in his 50s and 60s back then. I found a few articles about his coaching. He had also been the baseball coach of the high school, and a note saying that he'd retired in 2001. Nothing after that, and no obituary or anything. I like to think that he's probably just sitting around watching reruns of some show that he likes, drinking beer and playing with his grandkids, who are probably about the age Chloe and I were at the time. And that's just what I like to imagine. Anyways.
In the quiet streets of Lancaster, Pennsylvania, where small-town charm met the digital marketplace, a tragic incident unfolded, leaving a community in shock that nobody expected to happen. Marcus Harris, an 18-year-old resident, found himself entangled in a web of accusations, charged with first-degree murder and a string of offenses following a fatal encounter on Facebook Marketplace. The victim, Carlos Carranza Ricardo had recently migrated from Cuba, eager to build a new life in his senior year at J.P. McCaskey High School. His dreams were abruptly shattered in a seemingly routine transaction gone wrong. Dr. Justin Reese, the school's principal, expressed the collective grief in a letter to students and their families. "The loss is being felt widely in our school community. Please keep Carlos's family, friends, and our students and staff in your thoughts as we process this loss," the letter implored, capturing the somber mood that had gripped the school. The unfortunate incident unfolded on a nondescript Sunday when Carranza Ricardo and a friend embarked on an 80-mile journey from Lancaster to the 2700 block of Harlem Avenue in Mosher. Their mission is to purchase a car advertised on Facebook Marketplace. Little did they know that this seemingly mundane endeavor would thrust them into a nightmarish sequence of events. Charging documents reveal that as the duo decided against the purchases and began to drive away, gunshots shattered the air. In the chaos that ensued, Carranza Ricardo was struck in the head by a bullet, sealing his fate. The vibrant immigrant, who had come seeking opportunity and a chance at a better life, succumbed to the violence that lurked beneath the surface. Shock trauma became the stage for the tragic final act of Carranza Ricardo's life. The hospital, usually reserved for healing, now bore witness to the devastating consequences of a chance encounter turned deadly. As news of the incident spread, the community grappled with the senselessness of the crime. In the pursuit of justice, the police identified Marcus Harris, allegedly the perpetrator of the crime. Charged with grave offenses, including first-degree murder and attempted murder, Harris became the focal point of an investigation that sought to unravel the truth behind the fatal meeting. Ricardo's friend, an unwitting eyewitness to the unfolding tragedy, played a crucial role in Harris's identification. With a heavy heart, the friend recounted the events leading to the fatal shot that claimed the life of his companion. The details painted a grim picture of a routine transaction turning into a horrifying crime scene. Upon locating Harris at his residence, police discovered a handgun, adding a sinister layer to the unfolding narrative. Harris, however, maintained his innocence, claiming to be the seller but asserting his ignorance regarding the subsequent gunfire. His narrative painted a conflicting picture, leaving investigators to piece together the puzzle of that fateful evening. "I was the seller," Harris insisted during police questioning, according to the charging documents. However, he maintained that he had returned to his brother's car after the transaction was called off, only to hear gunshots fired shortly afterward. As the legal proceedings commenced, the city councilman for District 9, John Bullock, shared his sentiments over the tragedy. "My heart goes out to anyone who loses a family member, having lost family members myself. It's a hard thing to deal with, especially when they're just trying to make a transaction. They weren't involved in anything nefarious," Bullock reflected. The community leader emphasized the need for continued efforts to prevent such crimes, particularly among youth. Despite a decline in overall homicide and deadly shooting numbers in the city, Bullock acknowledged that there was still much work to be done. "The loss of one person is still too much, so a lot of folks and neighbors may not feel that drop. We still just have a lot more work to do in the city," he affirmed. During legal proceedings, mourning, and community reflection, the specter of Facebook Marketplace loomed large over the narrative. The digital platform, designed to facilitate transactions and connect buyers with sellers, had inadvertently become the backdrop for a tragic tale of loss and violence. As investigators delved into the details, the role of Facebook Marketplace became a focal point. The virtual marketplace, designed to bridge distances and facilitate transactions, now finds itself entwined with a real-world tragedy. The allure of convenience and accessibility that platforms like Facebook Marketplace offered in this instance led to devastating consequences. In the courtrooms, the story unfolded with each witness's account and piece of evidence, with the marketplace surfacing repeatedly in conversations. The digital platform, designed to bring people together for commerce, was now a central element in a narrative that transcended the boundaries of the virtual world. As the legal proceedings continued, the community grappled with the aftermath of the tragedy. Dialogue echoed through the halls of J.P. McCaskey High School as students and staff sought solace and understanding in the wake of Carranza Ricardo's untimely demise. The resonance of his loss reverberated through conversations, with each mention of Facebook serving as a stark reminder of the intertwining of the virtual and the real. In the somber moments of reflection, the community sought not only justice for Carranza Ricardo, but also a collective introspection on the implications of digital transactions. Facebook Marketplace, once a beacon of convenience, now carries a weight of responsibility in the community's consciousness. As the legal proceedings unfolded and the community grappled with grief, the story served as a poignant reminder of the fragility of life and the unforeseen consequences that could arise in the pursuit of ordinary transactions. The tale of Carlos Carranza Ricardo and Marcus Harris became not just a courtroom drama, but a reflection on the intersection of the virtual and the tangible, where the word Facebook echoed through the corridors of a community forever changed by an unforeseen tragedy. And so, the town realized how fragile life is and that unexpected dangers can be hidden in ordinary things, like buying and selling.
I don't understand, James. I'm worried about our son. He was just fine the day when we went there. Don't worry, honey. I think he's feeling unwell. That's why he's so quiet. Give it some time, and he will get back to normal. James replied in a calm tone after hearing my concern about Austin. I hope so, I said while taking a long sigh. My name is Martha Geller. I got married to the love of my life, James, at the age of 21. But even after 15 years of our marriage, I was unable to conceive. We tried everything and spent our entire life savings to get pregnant, but were unable to. After years of suffering and prayers, God finally blessed us with a son like Austin. He was our only child, and we loved him very much. But the problem was that for trying to get pregnant, we were not able to save a single penny to raise our child. Both of us are working to provide everything for Austin. He is 7 years old, and he was always a bright and cheerful child who could bring a smile to your face even if you were having the worst day just by his childish and cute acts. We used to be busy all week and were not able to provide much affection, but no matter the case, we would always go somewhere out to eat on the weekend by Austin's choice. Austin was asking to go to Domino's Pizza that day, but we could not take him.
Ouch! It's a cavity, but I have a good brushing routine. Switch to Oral-B Electric with this. Unlike an ordinary brush that can leave up to half the plaque behind, Oral-B Electric's round head cups each tooth and gets to those hard-to-reach areas to remove up to 100% more plaque.
Switch to Oral-B Electric with Oral-B Paste. Say goodbye to cavities.
So we decided to give him a surprise. When we came back from work, Austin was playing with our cat Mew. We adopted Mew before Austin was born, and she loved him with all her heart. They were like siblings, inseparable. As we entered the house, Austin came running into my arms as always. Austin, are you ready for a surprise? James asked him with a big grin on his face, while I smiled softly, holding Austin in my arms. Yes, Daddy, he squealed in excitement and looked at me in hopes to find out about the surprise. Not this time, Austin. This surprise is from the both of us, so I cannot tell you. I pinched his nose playfully while saying that. He cutely pouted at my response. James and I both started laughing, and looking at us laughing, he also joined in. We sat inside the car, and James drove us to the Domino's Pizza location that was on the verge of the town. When we reached, the time was 11:08 p.m., and their closing time was around 11:30 or something. As Austin saw us entering the pizza place, he was super happy and excited. The place was almost empty except for one or two customers that were sitting in there. We let Austin choose the pizza, and he ordered a family-sized non-veg cheese burst pizza for us. The order was ready within 15 minutes or so, and we started to eat. That was when Austin said that he wanted to use the restroom. Do you want me to come with you, honey? I asked while standing up from my chair. "No, Mom, sit down. I'm a big boy now. I can go on my own," Austin said, and he sneakily looked at the girl standing over to the corner. James and I looked at each other and smiled. "Okay, big boy, go on your own then," James said with a big smile on his face. I laughed, looking at Austin blush. He went to the restroom and we waited for him to come back. But Austin did not return, even after 20 minutes had passed, which made me worried. A Domino's employee came and told us that it was closing time and we should hurry, so I decided to go and check on Austin. I asked James to come along with me because Austin had gone to the men's room. I waited outside the washroom while James went in to check. After a few minutes, an extremely worried James came out from the washroom carrying Austin in his arms, who was unconscious and had wet his pants as well. Watching my boy in that condition felt like thousands of needles had stabbed deep into my heart. I got so worried that I immediately snatched Austin from his arms and hugged him. I asked James about it, and he told me that he found him in this condition when he went in. We immediately took Austin to the hospital. The doctors told us that he only had a mild fever, and it was also because he had wet his pants, but his heart rate and blood pressure were a bit higher, which made it look like he must have gotten scared of something. After coming back from the hospital, I changed Austin's clothes and took him to my bedroom to sleep, because I was too worried to let him sleep alone. Austin woke up screaming in the middle of the night. I embraced him and patted his back and kept saying that everything was fine and that I was there for him. He cried without speaking a word, and after calming down, he finally slept while I stayed awake, looking after him the entire night. After that day, Austin lost his cheerfulness and stopped speaking, which made me extremely worried. He would often wake up in the middle of the night screaming because of a nightmare. I asked him several times, asking him about what happened in Domino's Pizza, but he kept quiet. After losing every chance to cheer him up, I remembered that he got a crush on the girl whom we last saw at Domino's Pizza, so I decided to let him meet her and ask him, "Austin baby, do you want to meet that girl from Domino's Pizza?" As I asked him this, surprisingly, his eyes got bigger in fright, and he started to scream and have a panic attack. "He's going to kill her! He's going to kill her!" And then he fainted. I did not understand what was happening. I called James and told him that I was taking Austin to the hospital and asked him to come straight there. As James reached, I told him to look after Austin and not to leave his side no matter what. I went to the Domino's to check what made my boy like this. After reaching, I asked around about the girl and found out that she had died. She went to the washroom the same night, and after coming back from there, she died from a heart attack. The strangest part was that she died after we brought unconscious Austin to the hospital. I still could not figure out what happened that day, and how did Austin know that she was about to die? But then one day, I found a drawing that Austin made that looked like a monster with devil horns.
When a cold disturbs your family's sleep, Vicks Vapor Rub relieves cough, nasal congestion, headaches, and muscle aches due to colds. They sleep.
My missing crush. What happened to your online store, Emma? I asked. Nothing much. I have set it up, but promoting it is an issue, she replied with a tired voice. But I thought you said you had enough money for that. I said again, reminding her of this. Yes, that was when I did not know how much it was going to cost. Promotional stuff is more expensive than I thought. She again looked at me with tired eyes, and that's when I got an idea. Why don't you try self-promoting? I can help you with that, I suggested. What? Will you? Really? She held my hand and asked me while looking into my eyes. That's what I just said, I said, and it made her happy. We decided to come up with a few strategies to do the self-promotion and then meet the next day at a coffee shop near my office. The next day after work, I got earlier at the coffee shop and waited for Emma to show up. About 50 minutes later, she walked to the table I was at and sat across me. She looked pretty in the green dress that she was wearing. Anyway, as we were sipping our coffees, we started to discuss just what we would be doing to self-promote this thing. I suggested we started by sending out messages to everyone we know and use social media to promote the store, since social media could attract most of the customers into visiting Emma's website. Facebook was my primary suggestion because it is the biggest platform that has the largest audience among other social media platforms. I had to set up a page and start promoting the store. I told her not to worry too much about it, for I would take care of setting up the pages and everything that they needed. After finishing up the discussion and the coffee, I asked to drop her home, and she agreed to. For those of you who are wondering about me, my name is Eden Miller. Emma and I have been childhood friends, and I've always had a crush on her. But she only saw me as a friend and nothing more. I did not want to ruin our relationship, so I never told her how I felt. We graduated from the same high school, and after that, Emma got into fashion design in college, while I chose business management. During the second year of college, she got into her first relationship, which made me feel devastated, but to my relief, they broke up within a few months. Emma had always been working part-time jobs even when we were in high school and saving up money, and after graduating from college, she decided to open up her online clothing store. Even though I told her that I would help her financially if she needed it, she never asked for my help. So it was finally my chance to prove myself to her. After dropping Emma off at her house, I went to my apartment, and despite my busy schedule, I started working on the Facebook page for her online store. I asked all my friends to spread the word about the store, and they were pretty nice to do that. After setting up the page, I started uploading frequent posts regarding the online store, products, and things of the sort. A week went by, and the response was slow, but I was positive that it would increase over time. I guess Emma was too eager for it to get successful. She called me one day and told me that as she was uploading some stories related to her store, she got a message on Facebook from a stranger. The stranger told Emma that he could help the store become a success in no time and asked her to meet somewhere for further discussion. I told her that there are many such scams on Facebook, so be careful, and despite my asking her to reveal the address where he asked to meet her, she did not tell me about it. Emma, who used to tell me every little detail of whatever she was up to, was not telling me something as important as this. It made me feel anxious for some reason. I felt that something was definitely off about this. I tried contacting her, but she turned her phone off, which made me even more worried. As time was passing, I started feeling this tightness in my chest because her number was still off. I drove to her house and found it locked. I started pacing back and forth in front of her house, waiting for her. Hours passed, and the darkness of the night had started to spread, but there was still no sign of her. I sat in front of her house all night long and was so worried that I started to cry because her phone was still off and I had no idea where she was. The next morning, the very first thing I did was file a missing person report for her. And after that, I asked one of my friends who was a hacker to hack Emma's Facebook, ID, and track the person account who had sent the message. He called me back 4 hours later and informed me that the account Emma was talking to was a fake one. I got even more worried and started to panic. Police began the search and investigation, but they had no clues to find Emma. It was like the man did not leave any traces behind to follow. 2 more days passed, and there was still no sign of her. And that was when my hacker friend called and informed me that there has been a new post made by Emma on her Facebook account. He sent me the picture, and it was Emma wearing a blue dress and smiling, which I could tell was forced because after crushing on her for so long, I could tell when she would be smiling truly or when she gave us a fake smile. After looking at this picture very carefully and closely, it seemed that she had bruises on her neck, which were covered up with makeup, and her eyes looked puffy as well. I zoomed in on the picture and tried to recognize the surrounding. It seemed like a nightclub in Western Town. I updated the police about the details and headed to the nightclub. The officers reached there before me and asked about the girl in the picture. The employees denied seeing her. As we were asking around, one of the employees admitted to seeing her with a man. They requested CCTV footage, and in the footage, it could be seen that a man came in with her, but they left just after taking a picture of her. Emma looked like she was getting forced into doing all that, and the way she was walking seemed weird. The guy looked somewhat familiar to me, I just couldn't quite put my finger on it. As I tried remembering the guy, something in my mind clicked, and I remember that Emma showed me a picture of this guy when she was in college. He was her ex-boyfriend, Derek. I guess I never told you why Emma broke up with him. It was because he was manipulating her. He was aggressive, and he started to raise hands on her while making up his assumptions. Anyway, I told officers about the guy, and they immediately went and started tracking his whereabouts. He was soon arrested in his house, and the interrogation started. He tried to act as if he did not know anything about it, and then he told the officers that he hadn't even seen Emma for years. But when they told him that they know that he had kidnapped and hidden her somewhere against her will, he finally opened his mouth. Emma was found locked in one of the warehouses that was owned by him, and she was in a terrible state. He used to beat her, rape her, and do horrible things to her, which made her traumatized. She was sent to the hospital for treatment and recovery, while Derek was locked up in prison, and trials were held against them after that. I don't know how she managed to endure all these tortures and sufferings, but now that she was found, I promised myself that I would never let anything happen to her again.
In my early 20s, I went through a wandering stage. I had just graduated from college and couldn't find a job anywhere. Rather than go a couple $100 into the hole every month paying for rent while searching for a job, I decided to pack up with my few belongings I owned and headed out to see the country. And this is something I cannot recommend enough. Stay off the interstates, pop a train from time to time, and hitchhike with no particular destination in mind. It was this kind of aimless wandering that led me to the Pine Barrens of New Jersey. If you've never experienced them, the Barrens are an amazing place. Huge stands of oak and evergreen trees, many older than time itself, grow out of that strange, sickly soil. Sugar sand, the locals call it in the rainy season, that forms quicksand. And then the dry season, it can still swallow farm machinery whole. Of the few farms that I saw, they all looked like they had seen better times, and many looked like they had sat untouched for decades. There was something alluring about that place, a sort of ancient secret I was afforded glimpses of in the shadows when the wind stirred the trees. The sort of movement at the edge of your vision that follows you throughout the day, but disappears as soon as you turn your head. From time to time, I hiked down old dusty roads. An old pickup truck or a rusted-out car would bound over a hill toward me. Most times, the driver would eye me suspiciously and speed up as they approached. Occasionally, the driver would stop to talk to me for a few minutes. "What are you doing out here?" one old toothless man clad in overalls asked me wandering around. "Seeing what there is to see," I replied. The old man spat out a putrid brown stream into the dust. "Ain't nothing to see around here." When I asked the old man what he meant by that, he made a guttural, throaty sound. I wasn't sure if he was choking on his tobacco or bothered by the question, but he didn't answer. He offered me a ride in his pickup the way that I had come back into town. But when I declined, he spat out into the dirt again and sped off, shaking his head. My eventual plan was to make it to Delaware sometime that summer and meet up with some extended family there, but I was in no hurry. In truth, I had been in heaven these last few weeks, taking my time heading south and exploring anything that caught my eye. I had explored every abandoned building and every cave I had seen. I had half my weight in power bars in my backpack. But over the last 2 months, I had honed my skills at trapping rabbits and gathering wild edibles. Sitting up late at night beside my campfire and sleeping beneath the stars. The night sky in an area so devoid of human influence is beyond comprehension. But tonight, there were clouds moving in, and the sun was disappearing faster than I had grown accustomed to. When the deep roar of thunder shook the valley, I knew that I had better find shelter. In the failing sunlight, I could see in the distance some structures at the top of the hill. I ran the half-mile distance and was disappointed to see that the ancient house and barn were in terrible shape. The roof of the barn had been completely collapsed, and the upper 2 floors of this 3-story house had collapsed into a mangle of ancient wood. Still, the house was my best option, so I made my way toward it as the heavens began to open up. As I'd seen on other properties in the area, this house had a small cemetery in the yard. I ran toward the gaping front door of the dilapidated house, carefully making my way between the headstones. When lightning flashed, I was able to make out the name on several of the headstones, which the elements hadn't completely erased. When they got inside, the floor was spongy, but felt solid enough to hold my weight. I took off my pack and set it near the door, caught my breath, and had a look around. The hinges of the front door had long since rusted away, but I was able to fit the door back into the opening enough to hopefully keep the wind and rain out. At one end of the room, there was a stone fireplace and chimney which was solidly constructed, but I had no wood for a fire. Next to the fireplace was a stairwell full of rubble and cobwebs. I didn't dare apply my weight to those steps, as many had rotted to nothing under their own pitiful weight. Opposite the front door was an opening to an old kitchen of sorts, but when I tried to approach it, my foot went clean through the floor, and I decided to stay put until the storm blew over. The remains of the upper floor did an adequate job of keeping the ground floor dry, and I was able to arrange my sleeping bag so that very little water draining from the upper floors managed to land on it. I got out my harmonica and played for a few minutes, then stopped, apprehensive. I didn't know what I was afraid of, but something had chilled me to my core. Outside, the storm had continued to build in intensity. My eyes were focused on that stairwell, seeing nothing in darkness, and flash blinded when lightning struck. I must have fallen asleep at some point because suddenly I came to with a searing pain in my neck from leaning my head against the wall for so long. Outside, the storm continued to pound down its fury upon Earth. As I sat there, rubbing my neck, and began to chuckle to myself for getting wrapped up in the superstition of the area when I heard it. At first, I heard indiscriminate movement of stairs and the ruins of the upper 2 floors. I was just about to write it off as rats when suddenly it stopped. I froze in place, daring only to move my eyes, and even then, just barely. After 30 seconds of paralytic fear, I smiled at myself again and was just about to settle into my sleeping bag when I looked toward the stairs. At the top of the doorway were a pair of glowing red orbs staring directly at me. Very slowly, they closed down to horizontal slits, then opened up again wider than before. I can't tell you how long I sat there staring at it, staring at me. It could have been a second. It could have been hours. And eventually, my lower-level self-preservation skills began to kick in, and subconsciously, I started reaching for the knife on my belt. Our eyes locked. My hand progressed inch by inch towards my only means of defending myself. Neither of us blinked for what felt like hours, and while the storm raged on, I prayed for another lightning strike so that I might even catch a glimpse of my adversary. But despite the ferocity of the rain, The darkness was absolute. When, at last, my hand reassuringly touched the hilt of my knife, it seemed as if the very fabric of existence was ripped to shreds. The creature began bellowing in the most unearthly, mind-numbing shriek I'd ever heard. Knowing I only had one chance, in one fluid motion, I released the snap that held my knife in place and released an inside overhand throw that I had practiced during my years of my misspent adolescence. I heard a sickening, wet thunk, and the shrieking increased in volume 100-fold. As I smashed that rotten door to pieces, I heard the creature flapping against the wall and screaming. Just as I wrenched the remains of the door open, a great flash of lightning struck. And all around the house, I saw piles of bones, feathers, and fur. I ran as I had never run before, since I ran into my veins pumped acid and my limbs were stone. I couldn't see where I was going, but I could follow the dirt roads by the sounds of the sugar sand slipping roadside debris into the ditches. I didn't dare look over my shoulder. When the sun finally rose, I collapsed in the middle of the road. Heaving, oblivious to the downpour, I awoke with a startle to the sound of a car horn blaring inches from my head. I leaped to my feet and spun around to see the same old man from yesterday holding his sides with laughter. When I opened my mouth to speak, he motioned with his thumb to the back of his truck. I climbed in without a word, and he began to drive. The events of the previous night had began to replay themselves in my head. What had just happened? No matter how many times I considered what I saw, none of it made any sense. As we drove, I realized how far I had run in the dark. It must have been nearly 10 miles. I was angry with myself for being so terrified by a dream. And that's the only thing that could have been approached from this angle. Everything fit into place and experienced to false awakening. There's so many times in the past when experimenting with dream herbs. I had a nightmare and woke up with adrenaline pumping and abandoned all of my gear in an old house. I suddenly realized that the truck had sat motionless for quite some time, and the old man was turned around in the seat, staring at me. I looked up at him, and he grinned. With sickening horror, I realized that we were at the bottom of the hill on which that wretched house sat. I jumped out of the pickup and thanked the old man who drove off. I slowly walked up the muddy path that led to the house, composing myself. When I reached the yard, I saw the old piles of bones, which had shocked me the previous night during the storm. Of course, there were coyotes and foxes in the area, and I had hunted a couple wild turkeys. The critters probably had their dens around here, and they had been using the house as a windbreak. Inside the house, everything appeared as I had left it. My sleeping bag, my pack, and my harmonica was sitting on the floor, and I could see my knife sticking out of the wall across the room. I packed everything up and put on my backpack, then walked over to the stairs and pulled my knife out of the wall. I was about to return it to the sheath on my belt when I looked at the blade and noticed the dried-on blood and that clump of oily black hair stuck to it.
Stalked. After completing my college education, I'd been